Hello, my name is Jean Alicia Elster, and I'm the author of Just Call Me JoJo. I will be reading to you from select passages of the beginning of the book. JoJo ran up the steps of the Bethune Branch Public Library. He pushed open the heavy wooden door with his shoulder. He was on his way home from school, but he had to make this one stop to see Mrs. Morgan. Mrs. Morgan was a librarian, and she was JoJo's very special friend. He came to see her every couple weeks, and when he did, she always had a book waiting for him. "It's springtime," Mrs. Morgan said as she reached under the cart and grabbed a book. She turned and handed it to JoJo. "That means it's the start of baseball season. You like baseball, don't you?" JoJo took the book. "Yes, ma'am," he nodded eagerly. "I even used the same bat my dad had when he was a boy." "Then you'll like this book," Mrs. Morgan smiled. JoJo held up the book and looked at the title, "The History of the Negro Baseball Leagues." "Negro?" JoJo asked, tilting his head to one side. "Today, we would say Black or African American. The Negro Leagues were a group of teams for Black baseball players. They formed in the early 1900s because it was the only way some very talented athletes could make a living playing the game they loved." JoJo weighed the book in his hand and looked worried. "This is a pretty big book, Mrs. Morgan." She gave him a light pat on the shoulder. "JoJo, you've become a very good reader. Give it a try." "Okay, I'll try it. Thanks, Mrs. Morgan," JoJo said. He waved goodbye as he hurried over to the front desk to check out the book. Then he piled it on top of his school books and headed for home. "JoJo!" He glanced over his shoulder when he heard his name called. Kalia and Tyrone were running to catch up with him. "Hey, JoJo, wait up," Tyrone yelled. JoJo stopped and put his school books down on the ground. His friends were out of breath when they reached him. "Look what Mrs. Morgan gave me to read." JoJo handed the library book to Kalia. "Negro baseball leagues?" Tyrone asked as he looked over Kalia's shoulder to see the pictures in the book. "You know," JoJo answered, "the Black baseball teams." "Look at those old-fashioned uniforms," Kalia giggled. "And look at that guy holding that beat-up wooden bat," Tyrone smirked, grabbing the book from her. "It's like my dad's bat when he was a boy. He still lets me use it," JoJo beamed. "I wouldn't play baseball with any beat-up bat. The guys today don't use an old bat like that either," Tyrone declared. He closed the book and handed it to JoJo. "How do you know, Tyrone?" JoJo asked, shaking his head as he took the book back. "Anyway, why don't you guys come over and play some ball with me?" JoJo invited. "Not with your dad's old wooden bat," Tyrone yelled as he cut across a vacant field and ran toward his house. "Maybe after I finish my homework," Kalia shrugged. "See you later." JoJo walked the rest of the way home alone. JoJo dashed into the house, dropped his books in the living room, and went straight into the kitchen. His grandmother was at the sink, cutting up a chicken. "What's for dinner, Grandma?" JoJo asked, sniffing the air. "Fried chicken, string beans, cornbread." JoJo grinned. It was his favorite meal. "But I need some paprika for the chicken. Go around the corner to Mr. Booth's store and get some for me." His grandmother put a $5 bill in his hand. "You be sure and count your change." As JoJo headed around the corner toward the store, he heard yelling down the block. He looked up and saw some boys from the next block. Their blue sweatshirts and blue caps meant they were part of Casey's gang. The boys were running out of Mr. Booth's store. They were laughing and shouting and holding bags of chips, cookies, and fistful of candy. "Thank God they're running the other way," was the only thought that went through JoJo's mind. He didn't want to get into any trouble with them. JoJo waited until Casey's gang had turned the next corner before going into Mr. Booth's store. There were cans and bottles all over the floor. One of the counters was tipped over. Without thinking, JoJo bent over to help pick up some of the cans. "Get out of here! Haven't you boys done enough?" JoJo looked up in shock. It was Mr. Booth yelling at him. His face was red and his eyes were bulging with anger. He shouted at Jojo again. I said, get out. But Mr. Booth, Jojo protested. Go on. I don't want any of you boys in my store ever again. But I said, get out. As Jojo backed away, still stunned, Mr. Booth sat onto the stool behind the counter. He held his face in his hands. Jojo turned and ran home in tears. He ran through the front door. He sobbed to his grandmother, Grandma, I didn't do anything. Honest, I didn't do anything. Jojo, what happened? Jojo told his grandmother what Casey's gang had done to Mr. Booth's store. And Mr. Booth thinks I'm part of the gang. Oh, Jojo. Grandma hugged him tightly. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry this happened. She wiped a tear from his cheek. Mr. Booth has seen you in his store often enough. He should know that you wouldn't cause trouble like that. Nodding and taking a deep breath, Jojo pulled away. I'm sorry about the paprika, Grandma, he said quietly. Then he grabbed his library book from the living room and ran upstairs to his bedroom.